The sun was up and shining brightly as he said goodbye to the fort and his new friends. There was a lightness in his step and a happy feeling in his heart as he walked away from civilization, heading deep into the wilderness and ever closer to the golden hills of the Ohio Territory. There was a stiff wind blowing through the trees, and the ground on the trail was treacherous and muddy from the rain that had fallen the night before. As he walked, he kept a watchful eye out for any sign that there might be enemies about, either those that would rob him of his possessions or his life, or even both. The spring blossoms were beautiful on the bright green trees, and the little brooks and streams that he crossed over were babbling merrily. After the rain of the previous evening, the sky was blue with white puffy clouds overhead. As he walked along, even the songbirds kept up a merry tune that quickened his pulse as well as his pace. Coming down the trail with careful footsteps, he saw many tracks of deer and could hear the occasional chatter of squirrels who barked at him as he passed by. Once he thought he caught a glimpse of a large black bear through the foliage down the hill, but after pausing, the shape resolved itself into a large black stump. So he just kept moving along. Pretty soon, he came out into a large field surrounded by rolling hills, and as he passed through the deepening grass, he could hear the dogs from a distant cabin telling him that he was disturbing their peace with his passing by. Not wanting to disturb them any further, he continued his steady pace, heading in a northeasterly direction. The plain continued for several miles, which made him happy, as he could see for long distances, which let him observe the terrain much better. He could see no smoke from campfires, and so, leaving the barking dogs behind, continued his journey. As he came to the end of the long valley, there was a large waterfall cascading over a 45-foot cliff, and he determined to stop there and refill his canteen bottle, which was already very nearly dry. Picking his way gingerly over the wet and slippery rocks, and trying to keep his feet as dry as possible, he safely made the other side. He then made his way toward the waterfall and found a large crook in a fallen tree to one side of the falls, where he could lean his rifle and keep it out of the spray. Unslinging the canteen, he stepped through the clouds of mist to the pool below him. Stooping down, he uncorked the bottle and slowly plunged it beneath the surface, watching the bubbles as they chugged their way to the top. The tiny sounds they made drowned out by the thundering torrent just feet from his right shoulder. When the bubbles stopped coming and he felt assured that the bottle was once again full, he drew it out of the water, recorked it, and shook the excess water from the leather sewn about it. Then slinging it over his shoulder once more, he went and retrieved his rifle and began to carefully make his way over to the stepping stone crossing. Although he did his best on the way back, his foot didn't quite make it, and he stepped a couple of times in the shallow water, splashing it up on his breeches. However, the shoes were well oiled and his feet did not get wet. Satisfied that his water needs were once again met, he climbed up out of the waterway and went onward. When the evening sun was 2 hands from the horizon, he found himself along a large creek. He had been told that there was a large hollow tree that he might spend the night in should he find it unoccupied. As he got closer, he paused and scanned the area, looking for the landmarks he had been told about, as well as making sure that there were no enemies around. Seeing what he was looking for and convinced that he was alone and safe, he made his way further up the creek and slowly up the bank, looking for both bear tracks as well as moccasin footprints. As this was the area in which he intended to sleep, he was extra careful, and all of his senses were on high alert for anything other than the ordinary forest sounds to which he was accustomed. While this degree of caution may have seemed strange to anyone in the settlements, those on the frontier were well aware that a moment of carelessness could mean capture and maybe even death. He took off his bedroll, haversack, and canteen and leaned his rifle against the tree with a powder horn and shot pouch across the muzzle for rapid deployment. Then he busied himself gathering twigs and dry grasses for a quick fire and a hot meal before bedtime. He carried them back to a hollow depression in the ground where the fire could not easily be seen from any angle until you were right up upon it. The ground was quite damp underneath, and he was sure that the hollow had been full of water not too long ago. After carefully laying the dry material on some dry sticks to keep them off the damp soil, he went to the creek and found a large, flat, dry stone, which he carried over and placed for a base on the ground. Then he dug into his possibles kit and pulled out the leather case, which contained his flint and steel. Squatting down beside the stone, he opened the leather case and withdrew the steel and a piece of flint from the brass box in which they resided, along with some precious scraps of charred cotton. With practiced fingers, he showered sparks into the tinder box until he saw several pieces of char aglow with heat. Lifting the bundle of dried grasses, he placed them atop the glowing charred cloth and then carefully began to blow air into the bundle. Within just a few breaths, the flames began to leap up, and he quickly placed the bundle on the stone below and began adding small twigs to the fire. He then added increasingly larger twigs until the fire was burning strongly and could be left alone while he prepared the rest of the necessary items for his supper. Going back down to the creek with his corn boiler, he knelt down and quickly scooped up a pot full of water, which he then carried back to the fire. Using his tomahawk, he cut some quick-growing honeysuckle, and then he used some dirt to camouflage the white scar so it would not stand out to the casual observer and so help to deter trackers. Back at the fire, he took one long pole and his two Y sticks and arranged them to securely hold his pot over the flames. Once this was done, he then lifted the pot onto the stick above the fire to begin warming up the cold creek water. Now he unbuckles the leather strap that holds his bedroll together and pulls out the dried corn and the jerk that he has carefully stored. This he precisely measures into the pot. He knows he must ration this food as long as possible, as he does not know how long it must last him. Plus, this food is the last tie to home and family and the loving hands that prepared it for him before his journey began. Putting the lid on the pot, he once more places it over the fire to boil. While the pot is boiling, he continues on down the trail until he sees the hollow sycamore. Raising his rifle to the ready, he slowly approaches the dark interior and sweeps it with his gaze and his muzzle. Finding it quite devoid of inhabitants, he steps inside to further investigate his home for the evening. Upon coming back out, He pauses to scan the surrounding area, looking and listening for any signs of danger. Seeing and hearing nothing, he heads back toward his hidden fire. The pot is boiling merrily, and his supper is now ready to eat. Meanwhile, back at the hollow tree, he lays out his bedroll and arranges his accoutrements around him for travel come morning light. Going back to the fire, he dismantles his cooking arrangement and then very carefully douses the embers with water from the creek, making sure that everything is thoroughly out. Then he gathers a couple of rotten logs from some distance away and cleverly conceals the area where the fire was. The flat stone and the charred embers were tossed into the creek, and when he is done, only an expert tracker would ever know that there had been a fire in that spot, and only after a quite thorough search. Sitting down in the doorway of the tree, he takes off his black, flat-crowned hat and puts on his knit cap for sleeping. Reaching behind him, he lifts the coin boiler from the spot where it has been cooling, as well as the cloth wrap that he stores it in to keep soot out of his haversack. Then, reaching back, he removes the spoon also from its cloth sack, and removing the lid to his pot, he begins to stir his corn and dried beef soup. All is ready, and he bows his head in a silent prayer of gratitude. The first taste of the soup reminds him of his thirst, and so he reaches around for his canteen bottle. Uncorking it, he drinks deeply of the sweet and pure water that he collected earlier in the day. The soup is still quite hot, but his hunger pushes him on, so he tries to cool it by blowing onto it. It is truly a satisfying meal for a hungry traveler. Supper being over, he readies his tomahawk, adjusting the small sheath and placing it close to his right hand while he sleeps. It will be quicker to deploy within the confines of the tree than the long flintlock. Stretching himself out to his full length, he wraps the woolen blanket about him and lays his head upon his hunting shirt for a pillow. He is sleeping fully clothed and with his shoes on, so that he could leave in a hurry, if need be. It seems that he has just pillowed his head when a loud screech echoes through the forest. He quickly rouses himself and stands in the entrance of the tree, looking and listening for all he's worth. He stands there for several moments. The sound does not come again. And so, looking around once more, he re-enters the tree to again pillow his head and dream of the land of promise that awaits him in the Ohio country.